In this story, I'm going to tell you how I cleared my name after my sister forged bank records, turned our town against me, and nearly took my little bookshop, then made her pay for it. I had receipts, a faded ledger, and a few customers who still believed me. But I didn't call the cops or scream my innocence. Instead, I built a quiet, surgical plan, forensic logs, a public table of facts, and one mediated meeting that stripped away her weapon, sympathy, and forced restitution. Watch to see how truth became the most effective revenge. My name is Alina Hartwell, but everyone calls me Nell. I am 34, I live in Port Townsend, Washington, and I run a small bookshop by the harbor that smells like rain and old paper. People think my life is quiet and safe. A steady routine of opening shop, brewing coffee, recommending the right book to the right person, and walking my dog along the ferry docks at dusk. I like that. I like knowing the rhythm of things, the way the bells at the harbor creak when the wind changes. The shop's front window faces the water. I can watch ferries come and go while shelving new arrivals. It is a private kind of visibility, visible enough that people know you exist, invisible enough to let you be yourself. I also have a sister, Camille, who is technically family, but lately has been more like a shadow who shows up with expectations and leaves with debt. Camille and I grew up in the same creaky house with the same parents, in a town that still remembered the chicken coop at the end of our lane, and the time our father fixed the church bell with duct tape. We shared everything that children hoard: secrets, scraped knees, the same dull gold ring my grandmother left behind that never fit either of us. But where I loved shelves and slow afternoons, Camille wanted speed: fast cars, fast compliments, fast solutions. She married young, twice, and she borrows more than she can afford and expects me to cover the gaps with favors and loans. I tolerated it for years because she is my sister, because family is a promise, because when we were children she had once held my hand on a freezing Christmas night and told me the world wasn't as big as it seemed. She was always brilliant at making everyone believe the story she needed them to believe. In 7th grade, she convinced the teacher that a flood of ants had ruined her homework. In college, she spun a scholarship tale that somehow included a lost dog and an eccentric aunt. The problem started small: a late rent check I co-signed for that went unpaid, a guilt-laden call about an overdue bill, a sob story that pulled at me and made me lend money I could not really spare. I told myself I was helping. I told myself this was temporary, a wobble on her way back up. It's easier to believe a loved one will land on their feet than to imagine they will leap and hurt you. Then one evening she rang the bell of my shop like she owned the place, and she said she needed cash to go to Seattle for an interview. The bell gave that familiar, almost conspiratorial jingle, and she walked in wearing a borrowed blazer, mascara streaks fresh from tears, her smile pressed into something brittle. Her hair smelled like someone else's perfume, and there was a tremor in her voice I had learned to read as performance. She asked me to front her $2,000. I said no. I had bills, payroll, and a small mortgage. I said no and felt like I had closed the back door on a storm. She exploded. Camille accused me of being selfish, of not being the sister she raised. I remember the way the shop went quiet, how a regular stopped mid-bite of his sandwich and looked between us like a referee deciding which team to cheer. She told me she would never forgive me if I let her fail. When I repeated no, she left an empty coffee cup on the counter, and a threat I did not take seriously at the time. If I did not help, she would tell Mom that I had been making deals behind their backs, that I had used our parents' savings to fund my shop, that I had been hiding money from the family. I laughed in that foolish, relieved way you laugh when it is inconceivable that someone close to you would hurt you. I was wrong to laugh. 2 days later, my mother called me in the middle of the afternoon, voice small and brittle, asking me how I could have taken $20,000 from their account. My heart fell through my feet. There were screenshots, bank transfers, an email thread my father had found. Camille had edited the thread to make it look like I had been swindling the family to fund my business and my quiet life. I had never been an expert at numbers beyond paying invoices, but my name staring back at me on that bank statement felt like a punch. I tried to explain over and over that I had not touched their savings, that I had not siphoned off a dime, but a seed had been planted, and Mom could not stop watering it with fear. Our family dinners turned into interrogations. My father stopped locking the front door as if expecting me to be the one to break in. I watched the life I had built start to tremble because of a lie spun by someone whose smile I had trusted. The betrayal was not only practical, it was intimate. Camille had taken the story of us, the younger sister with the bookshop, the elder sister who'd always been a little reckless, and rearranged it so I looked like the villain. The problem was not just money. It was that Camille had undermined the bedrock of who I was to them, and by extension to myself. The bookshop that had been my island felt suddenly like a fragile thing that could be taken away by a rumor and a forged bank record. I was unsatisfied with being helpless. I was furious that a sister could reduce me to apologizing to people who would not listen. How could someone I'd held as a child now aim to ruin the shape of my life? I wanted my name back. I tried first with the paths I knew. I printed statements, gathered receipts, and sat across from my parents at the kitchen table pleading with evidence. There is a strange intimacy to financial talk with family. Numbers became confessions. They listened in stunned silence, then asked why I had let this happen, as if my innocence had to be weighed against my negligence. I reached out to Camille, and she denied everything until she did not. She told me, through a rattled laugh, that she had been desperate and that I would not understand. Her voice slid between defiance and plea in ways she had honed since childhood. I hired a small local attorney recommended by a friend in town. It felt like calling in a cavalry. The lawyer found discrepancies and suggested we subpoena emails and bank logs. I thought once the forensics showed the edits and the timeline of transfers that began long before I allegedly touched anything, that this would clear up and we would have a quiet reckoning. Instead, it got worse. Camille started showing up at my shop in the afternoons, leaning against the counter and crying and apologizing to any customer who would listen, spinning a new narrative that I had pressured her into making the transfers, that I had convinced her it was a good idea. The town, small-minded in ways that are gentle when it comes to gossip and cruel when it comes to betrayal, started to look at me sideways. Small towns have long memories and short patience. They trade in stories and in the emotions those stories create. A supplier called to ask about payment delays and hesitated when I answered because the rumor had reached them. I lost a contract I needed. A regular customer who liked to buy new authors every month stopped coming. The pressure tightened like a noose. I doubled down on proving my innocence. I sent written letters, reached out to our bank with a fraud report, and asked for a forensic audit. The bank placed a temporary hold on access to the contested accounts and promised to investigate. For a while, that seemed like progress. Then my mother, whom I loved more than I could comfortably say aloud, told me she could not look at me because she had been supporting the family under false pretenses. She said it with the absolute moral certainty of someone who had been betrayed. I felt my lungs shrivel. My father, once a steady presence who repaired fish nets and gave the best advice on painting window frames, started to avoid my calls. Camille escalated further. She filed a claim with our neighborhood association, alleging that I had been running illegal side ventures from the bookshop and keeping untaxed income because she had found receipts she insisted were proof. She posted a frantic series of messages on community forums, tagging photos of me with captions that made my face feel like a crooked thing. My world narrowed to the shop's four walls and the echoing of my own heartbeat at night. I began to feel like I had lost everything that defined me. My parents' trust, my reputation in town, the quiet confidence that I could manage my life. I took a day off and walked the docks until the sky went purple. I thought of walking away, of selling the shop and moving somewhere anonymous. You can imagine the freedom of starting over somewhere people don't know your name. I felt the pull of that anonymity like a tide. I thought of confronting Camille in the kind of public way that would expose her, but I was afraid that doing so without ironclad proof would only make me look unstable. Then I found the thing that pushed me so low I had to fight up. An old ledger from my first year of business, a paper record with scribbled notes, and an old bank slip that matched the deposits I had made to my business account. It was mundane, a relic, but it was mine, and it connected the dots of my financial life in a way that digital edits could not fully obscure. There was the handwriting of a younger me, a scrawl that listed a shipment of used travel guides, the name of a customer who always bought Poe, and a note about the smell of coffee in the back room that had made me smile. That ledger anchored me to continuity. I realized I was clinging not to pride, but to authenticity. If I let this go, I would be admitting that a lie could rewrite who I was. That thought made me angry enough to act. I hired a forensic accountant with a reputation outside our county, someone who had unraveled similar family frauds. She came with a calmness that felt like a new kind of warmth. She was impatient with melodrama and patient with facts. We worked together, nights and weekends, tracing transaction metadata, IP addresses, timestamps, and server logs. The trail did not go where I expected. It led through proxies and jump servers, through a burner laptop used briefly at a cafe in a town 50 miles away, then to a sequence of transfers routed through a business that belonged to a man named Jordan Hale, who had once dated Camille. The accountant found inconsistencies that suggested collusion. Account numbers switched only after a specific date, an edited email with a different font file that betrayed tampering. The work was painstaking and expensive, but the deeper we dug, the more Camille's neat story unraveled into a messy knot. Each new file recovered felt like a plank thrown across a chasm. I thought I had reached as low as I could go when one night my mother sent me a photo of a flower arrangement on my shop's porch with a card that read, "I am sorry, please forgive me, from Camille." That should have been the moment I felt vindicated, but instead I felt hollow. It was a performance. The person who could have called, who could have asked, had instead chosen the easiest path: manufacture a narrative and wait for it to stick. The bank audit finally produced a report that showed no authorized transfers by me and evidence of forged signatures. That was the breakthrough I needed for legal steps, but Camille had already damaged relationships beyond repair. The community's memory was stubborn. My parents remained fractured. The ways in which they looked at me were altered like old photographs with corners missing. Camille had learned how to play the victim so well that any direct accusation felt like cruelty rather than truth. I was exhausted, and a part of me began to wonder if justice alone would restore what I had lost, or if I needed something sharper. A way to make Camille understand the scale of what she had tried to take from me, and to undo the theater she had staged for public consumption. I built a plan out of things I still had: the ledger I had kept, the trust of a few loyal customers, and the quiet power of truth when delivered with patience. I started small and public. At a Saturday market, where people came for local honey and handmade ceramics, I set up a table with books I had personally annotated, stacks of local history that mentioned the Hartwell family, and a sign inviting anyone who had questions about the shop's finances to come talk to me personally. I told the story of the shop in simple facts. These were my receipts, these were my deposits, here are the dates. People began to come by, not to argue, but to listen. My accountant wrote a clear, non-technical summary of the bank's findings and gave me permission to share it. I contacted the local paper and offered an interview, not to vilify Camille, but to explain the situation and the audit result. That felt risky, but it was a way to let the town see the evidence in daylight. I did not want a spectacle, I wanted the light. Camille responded with fury. She showed up at the market with a friend and tried to stage a scene, but the whispers had changed. When she accused me in public, several people I respected, customers who had been with me since I opened, spoke up to say they had never seen me take a cent for myself that was not accounted for. The tide shifted slowly like the turning of a large boat. People went back to the shop. The supplier called and asked to restart the contract. My parents, slow as glaciers but not immovable, wanted to see the full audit and meet the accountant. The biggest moment came when Camille realized my lawyer had secured a court order to get access to her devices. Facing the prospect of discovery, she panicked and sent a rambling message to our mother admitting she had fabricated the records and blaming me for pushing her into it. It was not a clean confession. It was an attempt to manipulate the narrative again. But the forensic logs we had already gathered showed the edits and the times they were made, and a judge finally signed an order that made the truth part of the public record. The relief was profound and complicated. I had won the technical victory, but the cost had been high: weekends buried in accounts, nights of insomnia, my parents' shaky trust. I could have left it there, quietly closing the case and asking the court to handle the rest. Instead, I decided on a final act that would be both poetic and practical. I wanted Camille to feel the mirror of what she had done without destroying her completely, because destroying a person you once loved does not heal you. My revenge, if you can call it that, was designed to take away the tools she used: the ability to weaponize sympathy and to hide behind family as a safety net. I called Camille and told her I had arranged for us to sit with a mediator and a financial counselor, publicly, in the community hall. I said the meeting would be broadcast to a small audience of neighbors and would include the accountant. She assumed it would be another chance to perform. Instead, I came with a binder of receipts, the ledger, printed bank logs, and a plan. Camille would pay restitution based on a reasonable repayment schedule drawn up by professionals. The community would know what happened, and in return, I would not pursue criminal charges if she complied and attended counseling. She was furious at first. The word extortion crossed her lips like a knife. I reminded her that her weapons were public opinion and half-truths, and I would no longer let her use them. I forced the confrontation into a place where light could touch every corner of the story. At the meeting, people listened. My voice did not shake. My parents sat across from me, and I looked at them not with a plea but with facts. When Camille began to cry and to blame, the accountant calmly explained the forensic evidence and the repayment terms. The room was awkward and full of shame, but it also had the clarity of a wound finally cleaned. The poetic consequence landed. Camille lost the audience she had always used. The neighborhood no longer rallied to every sob story. She could not casually walk into my shop and expect cash. People still felt some pity, but pity without the power of unquestioned belief was a barren thing. She had to work for understanding now, and in practical terms, she had to earn money to repay what she had taken. In the end, she complied enough to avoid jail and enough to face the consequences of her choices. My parents, slow to forgive, took time to rebuild trust. They started coming to the shop again and sat with me in the evenings, asking about inventory and joking about the dog. I felt the awkwardness of reknitting those seams, an embrace that required permission and time. The bookshop survived and, in a quieter way, thrived because customers returned, and because the town respected the way I had defended what I loved. The final twist came months later when Camille, shorn of the easy sympathy she had used like currency, began to call less and less. She moved away to a town where she could start over, and I heard through an old classmate that she was in therapy and working at a nonprofit. I felt relief, yes, but also a strange grief for the sister who had been lost to her own hunger. There are moments when vengeance and compassion overlap, when you punish someone, and the punishment is also a chance for them to do the hard work of becoming better. I did not feel triumphant in the way a movie promises. I felt steady. I had faced a betrayal that cut to the bone. I had learned how to build armor out of patience and evidence, and I had found a way to hold my family without letting guilt be the only glue between us. Revenge, I learned, did not have to be dramatic or cruel to be satisfying. It could be the return of the truth, arranged carefully so that the person who tried to erase you had to confront the consequences and, if possible, be given a path to rebuild honestly. The bookshop still smells like rain and paper. I still walk the docks at dusk. My life is not the same as it was before the theft and the public shame, but it is cleaner. Trust is quieter now, and my community knows me for the steadiness I chose to show when it mattered most. There are mornings when I open the shop and stand in the doorway watching fog unroll across the harbor, and I feel how small grace can be, a returned customer, a new shipment of books that look like promises, my dog asleep by the heating vent. Small mercies, sustained over time, became my victory.